talk about risk for a second, Christian. If you see all of this volatility or liquidity trap or whatever you want to call it not showing up, it's because central banks have been the only game in town, but have been hugely important for the last 8 years. What happens when we start normalizing?
And that normalizing is actually...
volatility is back when they start normalizing.
And that normalizing is, or at least the beginning of it, is perhaps around the corner. We do forecast the Fed to start hiking rates, well, continuing hiking rates, and perhaps at a slightly accelerated pace over the next few years. We at Citi at least think that the ECB will reduce asset purchases somewhat next year, and then perhaps end them entirely in 2018. The Bank of Japan may not be buying as much as it was anymore. So central banks are perhaps retreating a little bit out of asset markets, not because they feel like it, but because inflation is rising, because fiscal policy is taking over, stabilizing growth at least to some degree. Global growth looks a little bit stronger as well, and that changes the environment. So this calming effect of central banks stepping in all the time may recede somewhat. That being said, of course, if any tightening or any less loosening of monetary policy turns out to be a policy mistake, I think central banks will very quickly be back on the market.
Okay, let's say everything goes to plan, which is rarely the case, but let's assume that everything goes to plan. What kind of world are we looking at in 2 years when central banks, I wouldn't say have completely gotten rid of the safety blanket of monetary policy, but at least halfway there? You're in the duvet, but it's kind of not covering you fully.
Well, I think that's well put. That duvet, that safety blanket is still going to be there, but we'll be, peeking out a little bit, yeah. Exactly, from that duvet. Central banks will be less there. I mean, it depends on why they're doing it. If they're really doing it because they're giving up, essentially, because they don't think that all these measures that they've taken over the last few years really deliver higher inflation, that'd be bad news. If they do it because slack in the economy is being eroded, unemployment is falling to the lowest we've seen in many, many, many years, domestic inflationary pressures, wage growth is kicking back in, investments coming back, fiscal policy is taking over. If that's the case, then yes, maybe volatility will be higher, but it will be higher for a good reason, because growth is picking up.
Dean, help me here with the market vigilantes. Bring up the chart. This is the dots chart. Dots go, and that red line is migrating upward. This is the market vigilantes getting closer to the Fed. Are the market vigilantes out in front of Chair Yellen? Are they catching up? Are they behind the Fed as you look out at the meetings next year?
Yeah, I think there's been a certain degree of catching up.
Yeah,
the market, specifically the bond market, has moved well in anticipation of anything that Yellen has done. It's interesting, the market and the Fed have shaken hands on December. That's a done deal, at least in terms of the probabilities. It's really 2017, the arc of what the Fed does in 2017, I think looms large for asset prices. I think a big question for investors is, rates are going to go up as growth goes up.
Right.
That can be positive for the stocks at the same time as it's positive for the economy. If rates overshoot and they go up too far too fast, the linkage back to the stock market, we should pay a lot of attention to.
Christian, give us an update on the Citigroup call of slow global growth. Chair Yellen watches us every morning. Help brief the chair right now on the global economic growth. Where is it right now?
Well, for this year, we think it's about 2.5%. That means, though, that the first half of the year was a bit worse than that, and the second half of the year was a bit better than that, so more sort of 2.7-ish. And we do think that for next year, it's going to stay around that 2.7% level. But it's really kind of a sort of in-between year, because the new U.S. policies, if they really are legislated next year, they really only kick in to affect growth perhaps 2018 and beyond. So next year is a bit of a year where we expect things to get much better in advanced economies, perhaps because of U.S. policy changes into 2018 and beyond. But at least in the short term, actually, a higher dollar will drive down growth and inflation in the U.S. Perhaps there's still some uncertainty around. There's certainly political risks in Europe, plenty of them. So it may be sort of an in-between year on the road to something significantly better.